All right, what's up? Welcome in. Highly abbreviated edition here of GC Live. Not at our normal time, but had to hop on to talk to you a bit about the Shawn Elliott hire and what that means for South Carolina and kind of how this went about. As always, brought to you by our buddy Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage, clint.hammond.com, 803-771-6933. It is currently Thursday afternoon. So if you are, depending on when you're watching or seeing this, hearing this, whatever it may be, the news will be official on Friday morning when South Carolina has their Board of Trustees meeting. But by all intents and purposes, a done deal. Shawn Elliott returning from Georgia State to South Carolina, home for him, a Camden native, a Columbia resident. And Chris, I would say first and foremost, just to give people an idea before we get into what this means, let's talk about how it happened and kind of something that simultaneously, I would say this time around, like the last week or so since Justin Stepp left, it happened pretty quietly. But at the same time, when we heard this was happening, it wasn't a complete shock just because the name Shawn Elliott had sort of surfaced for this possibility a couple of times previously.
Yeah, Elliott, of course, serving on South Carolina's staff from 2010 to 2016 originally. All but one of those years under Steve Spurrier, the final one under Will Muschamp in 2016. And yeah, you're exactly right, man. I mean, thinking back over the course of, I don't know, what would you say, maybe a few years, certainly since Shane Beamer's been in Columbia, we've heard of the possibility of a reunion happening in some form or fashion at some point. I don't know, 2 or 3 times it seems like. And honestly, we heard it a little bit even earlier in this offseason, and nothing at that time materialized, but always something you kind of had in the back of your mind. I'll fully admit, wasn't tracking Shawn Elliott as a tight ends coach at South Carolina, even though, interestingly, that was the first on-field job he had in college at App State. He was a tight ends coach for a couple seasons, then switched over to O-line, where he's really been for the majority of his career. But yeah, it was quiet, Wes. We had heard a couple names. You and I were kind of tracking this thing going, man, it is kind of quiet. And then this morning we got the word behind the scenes that this is the direction it was taking, and heard tight end coach and run game coordinator. And I know we'll get into, of course, what that means, especially with that title. But it was an interesting hire. And I think a situation where the timing just worked out on all sides. Shawn Elliott, deep ties to the Palmetto State, family still in Columbia. Shane Beamer had a staff opening. Those two knew each other, obviously, from coaching together in the past, have kept in contact. Just made a lot of sense on all sides.
Yeah, for sure. And so shout out to Hijinks, by the way. Appreciate the kind words there. The easiest and best way to get a shout out from us on the show is just to throw a compliment at us. We're suckers for that. So appreciate you, man. And I hope you're enjoying being a subscriber there on Gamecock Central. If you are new, if you're not on Gamecock Central, come on over, try us out. You can subscribe first month for $1 at any given time. So yeah, man, it was kind of, like we said, it was quiet. I don't even think we got an inkling of his name in the last week or so until last night, hearing, hey, he's leaving Georgia State. And it was kind of like, wait, what? And so, I think a lot of people, and sometimes we maybe fairly or unfairly put people in like the casual fan or hardcore fan category. A lot of people, I would say, not even just in like the casual fan category, even people who follow this stuff pretty closely. I've had several huge Gamecock fans hit me up and just be like, wait, Wes, like what? Like he's leaving a head job for a tight end job. And I think, first of all, important to add on tight ends and run game coordinator. That may sound like a small thing to some people, but I think that's a big thing here. We'll get into that momentarily. But I think in this case, Chris, you have two forces here that were all kind of maybe pulling or pushing in the same direction. One of those being the greater sort of pull of college athletics right now in that there is so much pressure on a head coach and so much more that now goes into it that goes beyond the skill set of what it used to be a great head coach, or of course, referring to the NIL aspect, the transfer portal aspect, and the fact of if you're Shawn Elliott, man, you're at a Georgia State, a place that's a relatively new program. They've done well on the field, went to a bunch of bowl games, had a down year here or there, but for a first year coach, he really kind of had them on steady ground for the most part. But you were constantly going to be losing players to the portal. You're in a state where you're not going to be the top NIL draw by any means, and in a city in Atlanta that has 1,000 other things people could be putting their money to at any given moment. It's just a tough landscape. So you have those like bigger picture landscapes. Then you drill it down to the particulars of where he was at and the particulars of this is a guy who is from Camden. Family still lives here in Columbia. He, for at some moments, still lives here in Columbia, depending on, I don't know what his split was, but you would run into Shawn Elliott quite a bit for a guy coaching in Georgia over the last few years here in the Columbia area. So I think on the surface, it doesn't make a lot of sense. When you drill down, it actually makes a ton of sense in this particular situation, Chris.
Yeah, I think it makes even more sense than some of the other moves that we've seen, sitting head coaches make. And you're right, it is a different era to where, I actually saw a Georgia State like hot board, like now that Elliott's left, who's the next guy? And honestly, man, part of the hot board was like, well, I mean, would that guy even come? Because he could just like they had a couple Georgia staffers on there. 5 years ago, guys are going to be jumping at a group of 5 job as an entry point. Now they're like, I don't know, man. Maybe I'll just stay at this SEC school and make $1 million and kind of just chill. And it's a little bit easier, right, than everything you have to have as a head coach. But Elliott's circumstances, I think, were even more. Can't think of the word. Like extreme's not a good word, but it made this even more conducive. It made it make even more sense. He said in the release, Wes, that Georgia State put out on their athletics website, hey, this was a tough decision, but he said it's something I must do personally, right? And so you think about that, splitting time, being away from family for 7 years and having all these ties to Palmetto State. It's kind of a mama called situation, right? Where, South Carolina calls. He loves South Carolina. It just makes all the sense in the world for him to do it.
Yeah, lots of elements at play here. Hijinks asking a head job at a mid-major, will the pay be comparable to what he was making? I haven't heard what it's going to look like here at South Carolina. I don't know if you have yet either, Chris. We'll know for sure officially as a state school. That will be released with the contract information on Friday morning after the BOT meeting. And the fact that gets back to that run game coordinator aspect of this. They're not going to be able to get Shawn Elliott to leave a place like Georgia State to just come back and make what you would call like typical tight end coach money. I can tell you without knowing what that number is, it's going to be a pretty nice number. And the coordinate, like run game coordinator aspect of that helps them to be able to kind of justify, I guess maybe is the word, but he'll be earning it as too. Like we'll get into it here in a second. That's not just a title in this case. And with his resume, South Carolina, in order to make this work, I'm sure had to make it worth his while, even with the advantage here of him being able to come back home.
Yeah, I mean, I think Elliott, we were looking this up earlier, didn't we? He made somewhere in the range of like $800,000 as the head coach at Georgia State, which is obviously that's making very good money. But it's not like he's jumping from $3 to $4 million down to position coach pay, right? And if you kind of go through what South Carolina's assistant coaches make, I think the highest paid non-coordinator, Wes, correct me if I'm wrong, Dow Loggins as the OC, Clayton White as the defensive coordinator, both of those guys are $1 million or over. And I think aside from them, Pete Lembo he was going to make, I think, $725,000. Torian Gray is $675 this coming year, $700 the next year. I would think Elliott's probably going to be up closer toward those guys, towards the limbo gray territory, if I had to guess. But admittedly, I haven't been told any numbers. So he'll still be doing well for himself. But I think, Wes, if there is a discrepancy in the pay for Shawn Elliott, worth the trade-off to be able to make this move.
Yeah, man. I mean, honestly, compared to the rest of us, like normal people, yeah, $800,000 is you're doing pretty well, right? But with the amount of time a head coach in today's world and being away from your family, like Atlanta versus here in Columbia, family's still here in Columbia. It's not that it's that far away, but if you're trying to commute just back and forth, it is kind of far away with this traffic too. So I think if it's remotely close, you maybe even just cost of living, not having to have a place to stay in Atlanta now as well, just all being under one roof in Columbia, you probably make out better, even if the number's not quite exactly the same. But he'll be taken care of. I think that much is pretty certain, even without knowing what that number is. And just the fact that you lose some of that pressure that you had on you as the head coach, again, in today's college football world, is probably, it might be worth $100,000 or whatever it is that could be a discrepancy there. And but dude, it could end up being the same number. We don't know. I would think it would be comparable. Don't want to speculate too far, but we'll all find out. Like I said, USC puts the absolute official. They'll have that out on Friday, so we'll all find out then. And man, that statement that you mentioned, where he talked about he had to do it, I can't help but think back, not just to the NIL and transfer portal and all that stuff. I can't help but think back to, do you remember that press conference? Not the one where he went viral because he was just upset about what happened on the field. Do you remember the one where he got emotional talking about missing something for one of his kids, and it maybe being one of the first times? You got to wonder if just that's not a huge part of this as well.
Well, and let me give an example. And, Gamecock fans, I mean, there's some people, don't bring up Will Muschamp's name, but like Will Muschamp is a football guy, right? We all know that. He stepped off. He's stepping off the field at Georgia, right? And a big part of it is to spend more time with family, right? I mean, this is a guy, obviously he's made a lot of money coaching, but he's kind of on top of the world. Like, he's coaching DBs and involved with the defense at his alma mater, winning titles, playing in the SEC title game, and still has plenty of years left if he wanted, and is stepping away because you don't get those years back, right? And so, for Elliott, I think similar situation, and that's part of it, that weighs into all this is, I mentioned on the game earlier today, his son Max. I watched Max Elliott play at Irmo High for AC Flora last season, and Shawn Elliott was on the sidelines, right? And so he was either staying in town for a little bit or had come down from Atlanta, one or the two. And that's something that I'm sure, for a dad, for a family guy like Shawn Elliott, definitely is, something that weighed into this heavily.
All right, so let's talk about what this means for South Carolina. Tight ends coach, but also running game coordinator. And it keeps reminding me this earlier today, but keeps reminding me, remember last offseason, there were a handful of things that Shane Beamer just hit on almost every single time he's season. And it was kind of going into this season, one of the top things was turnovers and how they had way too many turnovers on offense. And it was just, they were drilling it into every aspect of the program. I don't know, Chris and I got a chance to sit down with Beamer for about an hour a couple of weeks ago, went over a number of topics. I felt like he was already a little bit into turn the page off. Almost tell he kind of points of where his head had been at talking to his assistants, and fixing the running game, to me, is going to be something we're going to hear about a ton this offseason. He's talked about it in a press conference. We saw that Chris completely reshape the running portal, went out and got a new running coach. One of the few spots where they truly just said, Beamer just said, hey, we got to just make a change. Like, got rid of Hardesty, brought in somebody new. And now you have what really up as an opportunity. There was some good timing, some good fortune in Elliott being available and wanting to leave. But the chance to add him as run game coordinator, what do you think that means maybe for South Carolina's running game schematically as far as his role here? Muted, Chris.
Whoops. Let me say, I don't think we have the full depth of what that may mean, right? I think we got to wait and see and kind of hear, hey, here's how it's going internally and report back. But from what I have picked up early, this is more than a throwaway title. Sometimes you see, oh, that guy's co-OC. He's co-DC. He's not calling plays at all. He's not even involved in anything. I think from what I picked up early on the Elliott thing, it's going to be more than a title. Now, what does that mean exactly? Well, I don't know. Dow Loggins is offensive coordinator. He's calling the plays. He's going to be doing the game planning for the most part. But I think in Elliott, you have a guy who he's coaching a position that he hasn't coached in a while, true, but he has the holistic view. He's a guy that is really well read in the zone read. Remember, when he joined Steve Spurrier's staff in 2010, he helped to revitalize the running game. And yes, Marcus Lattimore had obviously a ton to do with that, but he did bring some new concepts in that were applied to the offense by Steve Spurrier that really did help give the offense, specifically the run game, a shot in the arm. So you look at some different elements. Number one, you've got Elliott, a guy who is very experienced with the front, the box in football, coaching that. He's going to have some different ideas, some new ideas maybe that he could bring. He's experienced with dual threat guys. You look at Darren Granger, who he had at Georgia State as his quarterback, was a dual threat guy that they could, he was mobile, yes, but they used him on design runs. Well, now you have Lenore Sellers, stepping in as your projected starter. And then you have, like you said, Wes, you've kind of completely flipped your running back room. So I expect him to have, some type of influence. How much, I don't know, but it's more than just a throwaway title, I think, with Shawn Elliott.
Yeah, no doubt, man. All right, I'm choppy again. I don't know why. So, Chris, let's flip it up, man, or let's just change it up. Why don't you tax, and then you can tell everybody bye.
Okay, let's do it. Let me find our little graphic here. Oh, you already beat me to it. That part's not choppy at all. Give our guy. I've already messed it up too, Wes. Give our guy Larry Slaughter a call. The team at Liberty Tax. He can help you overcome your taxiety. 803-462-5576. 2 convenient locations in Columbia, out in the Irmo area. Give him a call. Make sure that you have a tax plan like I have, like my wife and I have. We've met with Larry. Super responsive, super knowledgeable, super helpful. And, like our guy, clint.hammond, Wes, he's going to want to talk some Gamecocks as well when you go sit down with him in his office. He can help you come up with a great tax plan and help you avoid your taxiety. Again, 803-462-5576. And, yeah, that's going to do it for us. Not a full GC Live today. Just a note, not full GC Live, just a Shawn Elliott reaction show. We're going to be back, I think, probably next week. Let's plan for Monday, Wes. We'll do it. Until then, see y'all later. Thanks for tuning in.